My name is Brandon Lewis. I'm a junior at Texas Southern University, and today I will be doing a project analysis on Verizon Wireless Communication Incorporated and its competitor T-Mobile. Here is my my financial statements for Verizon Wireless Communications. Is all the income, balance sheets, the retained and annual cash flow, as well as T-Mobile's. Going up here. And then next we have the Excel calculations of all the ratios that we have computed for both of the corporations and how they are doing in different scenarios. Here we have the liquidity ratios, which basically measure how much cash is on hand compared to the company's liabilities. Here we have the efficiency ratios, which measure how much the company is producing in terms of inventory, how much they get in terms of receivables, payment cycles, et cetera, et cetera. Next, we have the leverage ratios, the profitability ratios, and then lastly, the market value ratios. All of these are calculated through Excel, through the various balance sheets equations. And now we also have my project paper on both the company for Verizon and also comparing and contrasting it against its competitor T-Mobile. I guess I'll read off the abstract. This paper will evaluate the current financial performance of Verizon, a publicly traded company utilizing the financial ratio analysis DuPont chart analysis. This will be done by carrying out a time series and cross-sectional analysis with T-Mobile of the company using the 5 classes of financial ratios, which I listed before: the liquidity, the efficiency, the leverage, the profitability, and the market value. This research paper will show how well or bad Verizon is doing against its T-Mobile competitor, and it will also give us a good insight on the future growth or decline of Verizon. And in order for us to evaluate the company correctly, I had to calculate quite a few of the ratios which we have here listed out, and also be in the paper as well as we go further down. Here's an introduction of Verizon. With over 150 locations, Verizon is a global leader in delivering innovative communication and technology solutions and improve the customer way of life, way of learning, and play. Founded in 2000, the company operates America's most reliable wireless and nation's premier all-fiber network and deliver integrated solutions to businesses worldwide. So the companies listed here. Pretty much they're a telecommunications company that are pretty big. T-Mobile is in the same industry as well as its competitor. And here we have all the current ratios that we listed in our Excel sheet here, and are just laid out within the paper. We'll go down, and soon we'll start examining some of them as we go deeper into the presentation. For the liquidity ratio, a company's ability to pay off their current liabilities is known as the liquidity. Liquidity ratios show how much cash and assets can be converted into cash in order to settle for the company's outstanding debts. And when we examine it, we'll also be examining T-Mobile's, and we'll be going into the quick ratio, the current ratio, and the cash ratio that was analyzed. For the cash ratio, or for the current ratio, how we examine it is current assets divided by the current liabilities. And what we want for it to be greater than 1, as it means that the company has enough current assets to settle its current liabilities within the company. And as we look here, here's Verizon's 2019 through 2015 in that order. Here are their current ratios listed here. And as we see here, the current ratios for Verizon as well. As we see here, Verizon did start going up in the years, but did manage to decline in 2019. the most current year. And as we look at T-Mobile, they started off pretty strong, but then they started to have a decline overall. Verizon is currently in the better position when it comes to the current ratio, but only by a small margin. But both companies are still under 1. So if the companies were to go bankrupt, then their current assets wouldn't be enough to pay off their current liabilities for both companies. Next, we measured the quick ratio, which is the company's ability to pay off its current liabilities by using assets that are most liquid. A company with a decreasing quick ratio means that the company is taking too much debt and is struggling to maintain or even grow their revenues, or maybe even they're collecting their receivables at a slow rate. On the other hand, the company with a high ratio, quick ratio, means that they have less debt and are maintaining or increasing their revenues and are collecting receivables at a much faster rate. Here are the quick ratios for Verizon listed here, and here are the quick ratios for T-Mobile, its competitor right here. As you see, Verizon had started to become a steady incline up until 2019 as well, shown here. And for T-Mobile, we have the same kind of pattern as we saw in the current ratio, where T-Mobile started off strong, but then they had a huge decline in 2017, and they never fully could recover in the years after. And it's kind of the same thing here. T-Mobile is doing better than its competitor, or I'm sorry, Verizon is doing better than its competitor, T-Mobile, shown here. And then lastly, for the liquidity ratios, we measure the cash ratio, and a specific ratio of the total cash and cash equivalent to its current liabilities. It measures the ability to repay a short-term debt with cash or cash equivalents. So instead of using short-term assets or assets in general, we're just going to be looking at the cash compared to the current liabilities. And here we have Verizon's percentage of cash ratios here. And then here we have T-Mobile's. Verizon started off fairly strong, but they decreased every year. Well, not every year, for the most part every year. And in 2019, they're back at their lowest point. While with T-Mobile here, they started off pretty strong, but decreased a fair bit. And they seem to be struggling heavily. While Verizon's numbers are more close together, T-Mobile's does have the higher cash ratio, and it has outbeaten Verizon in every category. Next, we move on to the efficiency ratio. And the efficiency ratio basically measures how a firm can effectively use its available assets to generate more revenue at a faster rate. We'll be looking at 4 of these ratios when analyzing it, and that'll be the inventory turnover, the average collection period, the average payment cycle, and the total asset turnover. Next, we'll go into the total asset or the inventory turnover, which basically means it measures how fast the company is turning inventory into sales, which is very important for a company. Here we have Verizon's inventory turnover right here, listed here for the 5 years in a row. And we have T-Mobile. For Verizon, we can see that they have been kind of fluctuating. They were at its highest point in 2018, but declined a fair bit in 2019. And for Verizon has been on a steady incline for the most part, and had its highest point in 2019. But Verizon overall still has the better inventory turnover, as it's much higher and has been much higher for the past 5 years. And next, we move on to the average collection period, which basically is how long a company takes to collect its receivables. Here we have Verizon's average collection period for its receivables, and this is average days. And then here we have T-Mobile's right here. And as you can see here, Verizon has taken quite a fair bit of days to collect their receivables. It's gone up since 2015 and has continued to go up every year. While with T-Mobile, they achieve the exact opposite, where they're receiving their receivables in a fairly short amount of time, and it's gone down every single year, which is very good for Verizon, very good for T-Mobile, and much better as they're receiving their receivables at a much faster rate and actually collecting their cash. Next, we will look at the average payment cycle, and basically what that is it's basically how fast a company pays its creditors, which is very important for a company. And here we'll look at Verizon's average payment cycle right here, and here's T-Mobile's average payment cycle, and this is in days as well. As we see here, Verizon has gone up not every single year, but for the most part, have been around the same area. While T-Mobile has started off fairly high, but did manage to get their average payment cycle down to 51 days, about 58 days. But Verizon is doing much better in terms of its competitor, as it only takes them 21 days to pay its creditors, while T-Mobile takes approximately 58 days. And lastly, in the efficiency ratio, we'll look at the total asset turnover, which basically shows how well the company is using its assets to generate more money for the company, which is very important in any company. The higher the ratio, the better, as it shows it's using the assets more efficiently. And we'll be looking at Verizon's asset turnover ratios here, and here are T-Mobile's. Here we can see that Verizon has been on the decline for the past 5 years in terms of utilizing its assets more efficiently, while T-Mobile has been on the incline up until 2019, which had a slight decrease. But both companies seem to be in the same area of their their asset turnover. But overall, T-Mobile is doing slightly better, as it's barely edging it out. Next, we will look at the leverage ratios. When calculating the leverage ratios, we're trying to look out and find out how much leverage a company has over its debts. And when doing this, we examine 3 ratios and compare and contrast them. Those ratios are the debt ratio, the times earned interest ratio, and the debt to equity ratio. When we measure the debt ratio, the lower the ratio, the better, as it shows the company has more assets than liabilities. And here are Verizon's debt ratio numbers. And here are T-Mobile's debt ratio numbers here. And like I said before, the lower the ratio, the better, as it shows the company has more assets than a liability. So you can see here, Verizon started off fairly low in 2015 and 16, but gained incredible amounts of liabilities in the following years after. In 2017, they did manage to hit their highest peak, but in 2018 and 2019, it did slightly go down in terms of their debt ratio. For T-Mobile, they started off pretty high as well, but every year up until 2019, they did manage to lower their ratio. Here we can see that T-Mobile is doing better in recent years, just barely edging out Verizon again. And next, we will talk about the times earned interest ratio, which basically shows how well a company is able to make its interest payments. A high interest ratio means the company is able to make its payments, while vice versa for a low interest ratio. Here are the interest ratio for Verizon here, and here are the interest ratios for T-Mobile. As seen here, Verizon started off pretty high, but they've been on the decline up until 2019, the most current year, where they were able to go back up to what they were at in 2015 or 2016, sorry. And here are the ratios for T-Mobile, where they started off fairly low, but every year they managed to grow in size, edging out Verizon in the past 2 years. And then lastly, for the leverage ratio, we'll be talking about the debt to equity ratio. And then when we're doing this, we're trying to see how much a company is financing its operation through debt or through funds itself that the company has. The average debt ratio, we're trying to look at, we want the average of the debt ratio. As the lower the ratio, that suggests the company is not taking advantage of financial leverage. And this can mean like it's not using credit to its advantage. And the higher ratio means the company is not generating enough cash to pay off its debt. Both are bad, so we're looking for the middle. Verizon's debt equity for Verizon's debt to equity ratio, here are these listed out here. They have managed to go up, hitting their peak in 2017, but then start to manage to go down in the following years. As for T-Mobile, their debt ratio has been on the decline, which is very good for T-Mobile. In comparison, T-Mobile seems to be doing a better job. For the profitability ratios pinpoint how well a company is doing in a specific market. These wells will determine how a company can generate more earnings compared to its expenses and other costs that a company may obtain. Some of the ratios we will use and evaluate the profitability ratio are the total profit margin, the net profit margin, the return on assets, and the return on net equity. And when we look at the total profit margin, we're trying to find out how much revenue a company has past its cost. A high total profit margin is what a company is trying to look for, as it shows it can make a profit on sales. Here are the total profit margins for Verizon, and here are the total profit margins for T-Mobile. I'll highlight them here. As we can see here, Verizon has been on the decline, a slight decline in the coming years, while T-Mobile has been on the opposite incline for the past 5 years, managing to edge out Verizon in the past 2 years, just slightly. Next, we will measure the net profit margin, which measures the percent of income received from sales. Here are the percentages for Verizon, and here are the percentages from T-Mobile. As we see here, Verizon has had major fluctuations throughout the years. It started off with 14%, then dropped down, then went up again, then dropped again. So they've had major fluctuations. And as we can see here for T-Mobile, they had some fluctuations as well, but not nearly as much as T-Mobile, or not nearly as much as Verizon. But we can still see here that Verizon still managed to beat out T-Mobile in terms of net profit margins in all of the past 5 years. Next, we will analyze the return on assets, and we're looking to see how well the company creates profits compared to its assets the company has. For both Verizon's ROA, here is the Verizon's return on assets, and here is T-Mobile's return on assets. Here we can see that Verizon has been on the steady decline for the last 5 years, while T-Mobile has been on a steady incline. Verizon still is reporting higher ROA numbers, though, every year, but that is something to look out for in the coming years. When measuring the return on equity, we're trying to see the amount of return stockholders get back from their investments. The higher percent, the better, as it shows the company is able to produce a higher return for investors. Here we have Verizon's ROE listed here, and we have T-Mobile's here. Here we have Verizon's numbers starting off really high at 103%. In terms of how much money investors would get back, but it quickly started to decline in the upcoming years, hitting its lowest in 2018 at 29%, but then started to raise back up again in 2019 at 31%. While in T-Mobile's case, it has been on the incline, but then dropped in hitting its peak in 2017, but then dropped in 2018 and stayed the same in 2019. But overall, Verizon is the better company to invest in terms of ROE. And the last ratios we will look at is the market value ratio. And when we go into depth about, we will be measuring 3 of them as well, which is the price earnings ratio, the dividends ratio, and then the market to book value. And we'll talk about them each individually as we've done before. When we go into depth about the price earning, we are looking to see how much investors are willing to pay for a share within the company. When measuring this, we're looking for the higher ratio, as it means investors are more confident in investing in the company. For both Verizon and T-Mobile, we have their ratios listed here. For Verizon, they have been on the incline, but they had a decline in 2017, a major decline, and then they started back up again in 2016 and 2017, or 2018 and 2019. They started to hit numbers, and in 2019 they actually hit their highest peak that they have in the last 5 years. While with T-Mobile, they started off very strong, but hit a staggering turn in 2017. But then managed to pull it back, but not nearly as high as it once did in 2018 and 2019. While Verizon or T-Mobile has had the major advantage in every single year, it is kind of shocking to see how much they declined in the past 3 years. Next, we will look at the dividend payout, which we're calculating the profits, so much dividends are paid out to shareholders. The higher the ratio means the higher the dividend payout is to shareholders, which means investors are more likely to invest because they want more dividends paid out to their account. Here's Verizon's and here's T-Mobile's. Here we see that Verizon had about 11%. Then jumped to 21%, then had a fall in 2017 at 4% only, but then came back in 2018, had a slight dip in 2019. While with T-Mobile, they had increasingly lower dividend payout ratios as 8%, 4%, 1%. And then in 2018, 2019, there seems to be no, I could not calculate that in the Excel sheet. So I had no information on that. And lastly, we'll be talking about the market to book value ratio, which tells us the company's shares are overvalued or undervalued within the company. For Verizon's, and here are their numbers listed here, and for T-Mobile's, here are the numbers listed here. T-Mobile started off strong, but had a huge decline in 2017, and were never really never managed to really fully recover in the years after that. And for Verizon, they had no information on it for 2015 and 16, but they managed to create 61%. In 2017, had a slight decline in 2018, but came out at their highest in 2019, which they're currently doing better than T-Mobile. Overall, after we reviewed the different types of ratios for each company, it's safe to say that the company is, for Verizon, is definitely still viable to invest in compared to its competitor. But the market would still have to be closely monitored for the next upcoming years, especially for some of the ratios we've listed out here, as it's constantly changing and some of the ratios fluctuate quite a bit. Here's the works cited page of the page we used, and here's the appendix of all the balance sheets and the statements we use for both companies. Now, this has been my DuPont project for Brandon Lewis. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a good one.